So what I did was, obviously the spark system is efficient because there was nothing wrong with the engine the way it was running once you actually managed to get it going without ripping your arm off and making holes in your legs. I thought, okay, well, obviously it's got a way powerful ignition spark, therefore I can afford to move away the coil system from the flywheel and leave a bigger gap. The normal gap would be 5 or 10 thousandths of an inch. Well, I moved it away as far as it would go, which was about 50 thou. That's a couple of millimeters, which is quite a handsome gap. And that was just enough to actually sort the problem out. It didn't sort it out completely. If I'd had an adjustment for timing, I would have timed it very slightly later, but it's enough not to be knocking you for 6 bells every time you start the machine. I mean, it used to be absolutely dreadful to start it, murderous. And I would suggest if anybody has one of these, they do what I do, which is to start it with your hand on top and your foot against the petrol tank. If you try and hold it by holding it down here, then of course the engine has a terrific moment to spin. So if you have your hand on top, your foot against there, then if you do have one that kicks back, you're liable to get away with it. Of course, when it did kick back, it yanked the cord back so hard that it smashed all the plastic on the handle. So as you can see, I put a round tap washer there, which makes it a bit easier, and a bit of hot glue. So that sort of more or less sorted that one out. The engine is set up to run reasonably okay. Inside here, the main jet, for those of you who are technically minded, the main jet has a silicon bung in it to try and stop anybody altering it. It was set very, very nearly correctly, and although I have altered it very slightly, it was damn near right. Okay, so now to the other problem with the main part of the engine. Just as a matter of interest, while I had all the engine covers off to fix the timing, or attempt to fix the timing, I had this off as well, and I noticed that black oil was running down the bottom of the engine, making a terrible mess. And all that was the silencer box had come very, very slightly loose, and the gasket between it and the exhaust port of the engine was leaking slightly. So there are 2 screws here, and they just needed tightening up properly. So that easily sorted that one out. But as I say, things are going to go just gently wrong with this engine, probably. And you will have to spend a little time looking after it. I think if I was going to rely on this to work, i.e. if I had a garden business or something like that, well, you're going to spend a lot of your time actually looking after this to make sure it works. You won't be able to just drag it out of the back of the van and know it's going to work. So you probably don't want to go for something quite as staggeringly cheap as this. And I mean, it is staggeringly cheap. As I say, £110 for all this kit is quite amazing. Okay, so now to the other major problem with this, which was that, I don't know if you'll be able to see this perfectly, but the tank is held onto the engine by two lugs, which are in there. Don't know if you can see that, with bolts. There you go. Should be able to see that, I think. Now those lugs are basically going to get ripped off the fuel tank. What happened with this one was that the lug on the far side, which is down here, basically started to split the tank because the lugs had no fairing. They're basically moulded with hard corners into the tank itself, and hard corners and plastic tanks are not a good mixture. So as you can see with this one, probably I've got the hot air gun out, and if you're any good at HDTP welding, you should be able to do something like this to fill them in and make it a lot stronger and give it some longevity. If that's beyond your capabilities, then you're down to buying a new tank, and a new tank for one of these will be a reasonably expensive item, and you then have to start thinking about does it economically stack up? If you're buying, I don't know what a tank like this might cost, £20 perhaps, and the machine only cost 5 times as much, bearing in mind it's not only this part of the machine but all the attachments. That's a big expense, and I can't imagine that one of these would be less than about 20 quid. For instance, just to give you something to compare with, when I bought this, as I say, all those years ago, the tank, it's all been carefully designed so that the tank is actually built in and covered by metal. And it took about this actual tank in this one leaked, but it took nearly 30 years to do so. I mean, I repaired this last year, the oil tank, the petrol tank inside here. So it just shows you this one started to basically pour fuel out of here every, especially it would do it even when the engine wasn't going if you tipped it on its side like this. So you can't have that. I mean, you can't have fuel just pouring out all over the place. Bloody dangerous. And and of course it's actually quite close to the exhaust system. So you just want to watch out for something like that. So as I say, I strengthened these, and then in order to stop it happening again, I actually took this bracket off, made it fit properly so that there's no strain on these lugs anymore. And as you can see, probably, I actually bent it away from the tank, and then I kinked it up so that the tank is held in exactly the correct position. You can also see these rests started wearing out as well, so I filled those with a bit of extra HDTP from when I was doing the tank. because those are just going to wear through, and when that happens these are just going to fall off, and then the tank will become vulnerable in another direction. So as I say, these machines can work, but you just got to be careful. And I notice now at the 2-year mark that there was a big crack around here, so that means that this rubber grommet round the spark plug is not built out of the correct rubber for survival. I mean, it hasn't been sitting in the sun or UV or anything like that. It's just been sitting in a dark garage most of the time. So it shouldn't just perish away like that. And I also notice now, again at the 2-year mark, that this fuel pipe here, the black one, which has to be floppy because it continues inside the tank, and it needs to be floppy because the end of it has to be where the fuel is. So if you tip it like this, the end of it is down there. If you tip it like this, the end falls down to here with the fuel filter, and so it'll still pick up the fuel in whatever position it is. So it has to be floppy, but I notice that it's beginning to perish at the top. So that pipe, I mean, it's a tall order, having a really flexible pipe which is fuel proof. You know, rubber and fuel don't normally mix very well. So that pipe is obviously below the spec that's actually needed to last for years. So after 2 years it's already perishing, and my guess is it'll probably last another year, and then it'll start leaking air into the fuel, and so the motor will fail. It won't run properly. So so that's that. Well, while I had this bracket off down here, I took off this unit here, which is the Recoil unit, and I had to do a little bit of modification inside that because I could see that that wasn't particularly going to last. There are two little wire spikes which actually, when you pull this, you can hear them locking into the sort of mini flywheel inside here. But in the rest position, every time the flywheel was going round, it was just knocking the top of these little wired dogs